Welcome, everyone, to our third session in the third day of this year's Ashford University Research Symposium. I'm Dr. Tim Rice, and I welcome you today to this presentation. I am the Doctor of Psychology Program Chair and Lead Faculty Member. Really excited to introduce you today to Dr. Brant Pearson, and he's going to share with us risks and paradigm shifts associated with an employee's right to self-identify on social media, a Delphi study. It's his dissertation from Ashford. And he's coming to you from Titletown, USA, Green Bay, Wisconsin. And Dr. Pearson, we're looking forward to hearing from you. Before we get started, though, if you have questions, please feel free to offer that in the chat. I will be the moderator and asking those questions to Dr. Pearson at the end of the presentation. So, Dr. Pearson, you are on.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. So, social media, the universal norm to enabling people to create and share content. From the moment we wake up, we check our phones to ensure we didn't miss anything, overnight. From engaging with friends and family to getting the weather and news, even if that news is created by our friends down the street. Social media plays a huge part in our daily lives, sharing jokes to just seeing what people are doing, like attending this amazing presentation, hashtag Brant Pearson. Most of us have had that FOMO moment, fear of missing out, and have a desire to check our phones at work or about work, which is why the time has come to understand the risks and paradigm shifts associated with an employee's right to self-identify on social media. First, I'd like to thank Dr. Melanie Shaw, Dr. Christy Branson, and Dr. Scott Burris for guiding me along this research study. I have a PhD in organizational development and leadership from Ashford University, as Dr. Rice mentioned. Over 15 years experience in leadership and operations, both in the private and public sectors. Have numerous business ventures, most notably Intier Incorporated, a learning management system, and am a faculty member at several different universities. Should you have any questions or comments following today's presentation, certainly feel free to reach out to me at any time. Today, we'll highlight the background, theoretical framework, methodology, and the results of the study, followed by a brief discussion and Q&A. Again, as Dr. Rice mentioned, should you have any questions throughout this, please utilize the chat feature within Zoom. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and now the famed TikTok has allowed us to connect and share ideas and beliefs like never before. With a computer, phone, tablet, or smartwatch by our side at all times, sharing and creating content has never been easier, which is why it is estimated that nearly 3 billion people will be utilizing social networking by the end of the year 2021. Although social media has become the universal norm for many, we often now realize that we find harmless and unknowingly things may compromise personal privacy, an organization, or cause unwanted harm or unwanted solicitation. Organizational leaders, especially risk managers and human resources individuals, which we'll get to momentarily, may want to monitor social media for breaches of confidentiality or proprietary information, financial information, and negative remarks that could possibly disrupt the company's future business endeavor. Related to this concept, and according to a 2009 Deloitte study, it is estimated that around 60% of business executives feel they have a right to know how employees portray themselves online. So the purpose of the study was really designed to develop a consensus among a panel of human resource experts to identify desirable and feasible organizational guidelines for personal social media use related to an individual's place of employment. The importance of the study was to identify organizational strategies to help guide both employers and employees on utilizing social media that reduce the company risks and negative exposure while providing employees direction as to appropriate use. The implications of the study could impact the way organizations create future guidelines, policies, and strategies. So the general problem that organizational leaders face is the possible risks and exposure the organization can have caused by employees' emerging and rapid use of social media. Well, specifically, the research focused on the lack of clear guidelines or the gray area that exists when companies try to ban or limit social media altogether by employees related to their workplace. So the study really focused on three main pillars: social, identification, theory, and then the conceptual design. So as social media becomes the norm, people are becoming increasingly open to share and express feelings, thoughts, beliefs, and emotions freely, or as some would refer to it as being a keyboard jockey. People are also using it as an outlet to find and join groups of other like-minded individuals from around the world. In other words, socially identify with one another. The dynamic theory of organizational knowledge creation, in its simplest form, addresses the problems associated with transferring knowledge. In today's era, however, we transfer knowledge more than ever on social media, utilizing these platforms to know if our kids have a snow day or if we should hunker down for pandemics like COVID-19. We are turning to social media to inform us and to provide us news and updates. Lastly, the conceptual design for the study is based on a qualitative classical Delphi research method that had 4 consecutive rounds of Likert type scale questionnaires. The purpose of the literature review was to set the foundation and ground the study on identifying gray areas, pertinent concepts and theories, and provoke the need to identify desirable and feasible, again, key words, social media guidelines that can be used across industries. A review of the current literature did not reveal standardized social media guidelines that are deemed desirable and feasible across various industries. Social media can be dated back to 1844 when Samuel Morse sent the first telegraph from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore that read, "What hath God wrought?" However, social media as we know it today really didn't start until about 1997 when 6 Degrees was launched, which some consider to be the first social networking site. With nearly 2/3 of American adults and 77% of small businesses within the United States using social networking sites, it is no wonder why personal and professional identities are being reshaped by social media. Everything from sales to customer service to entertainment and fundraising, social media can be linked to thousands, if not millions and billions of dollars in revenue, which is why large organizations and small personal brands alike may want to identify both internal and external communications from all sources. Organizational leaders have had limited success in creating guidelines that reduce the company's exposure. Legally, organizations are faced with public and social humiliation, confidential information being exposed, and just tarnished reputations in general that could be detrimental to customer relations and future acquisitions. While employees could face disciplinary actions, termination, legal ramifications, and merely a loss of ethical and moral respect if they engage in inappropriate, false, or misguided social media sharing. According to a report by Blue Hill Research, a single social media incident can cost a company upwards of $3.5 million, which is staggering. Some of the legal entities that organizations may need to account for are the Health Insurance and Portability Act, or HIPAA, financial industry regulations, which have confidential and sound privacy practices, which are essential in the high volatile industry where people's life savings are at stake. The National Labor Relations Act that identifies no direct federal laws regulate organizations' ability to control an individual social media account. However, many states prohibit employers from requiring employees to divulge personal and social media information, usernames and passwords, and are not obligated to open personal social media accounts in front of an employer. Most importantly is the First Amendment, which a lot of people go to. However, the First Amendment only protects employees' use of social media when it comes to the discussion of pay, benefits, and working conditions. Finally is ownership. As organizations actively encourage employees to use social media to help promote its brands, services, and products, the need to understand who owns the content, who owns the followers, becomes increasingly important. So utilizing a classical Delphi design, the research study used 4 consecutive rounds of questionnaires to gain a group consensus of desirable and feasible social media guidelines. The Delphi study was appropriate and cost-effective for reaching a wide variety and diverse participant pool. The data collection of round one focused on identifying themes for both current and future guidelines, as well as determining the risk-tolerant importance of social media. Subsequent surveys used the previous round's results to create the questions that were then used to continually drill down and come to a consensus. So the research questions for the proposed study were helped determine a consensus among a panel of 25 human resource experts as to the desirable and feasible organizational guidelines and strategies for employees' use of social media concerning publishing company information online, currently and in the future. The research questions and sub-questions were derived from identified gaps in the literature. So now I'm getting more into the kind of nitty-gritty. So the participants of this study varied tremendously in gender and age, ranging from 20 to 60 years old. Their years working in human resources ranging from 3 to 30 years, education level, and industry, which included 23% in healthcare, 19% in professional services, 15% in manufacturing, 11% in finance, 8% in technology and transportation, and 4% in supply chain, forestry, construction, and food preparation. So you can see a wide variety of industry participants. The panel did skew heavily in terms of female, with 81% versus 19% male participants. Having the diverse population pool contributed to the validity of the study and the insight needed to identify desirable and feasible guidelines that could be used across various industries. So now looking at starting with round one of the survey, each participant identified 10 current and 10 future social media guidelines that he or she considered most salient. The results of round one questionnaire were manually analyzed and coded into these themes. The themes include confidentiality, employee relations, poor communication, productivity, and reputation. The first two rounds of the rounds used a 5-point Likert type scale from very undesirable to very desirable, while rounds 3 and 4 used a 4-point Likert scale to further validate the confidence in the results. In round one of the study, data resulted from open-ended responses. And in round two, participants were asked to rate the top 2 guidelines from each theme within both current and future guideline sets or batches using the 5-point Likert type scale. The guidelines with the highest weighted average were then utilized for round 3. So in round 3 of the study, the current and future guidelines were combined into a singular list. Participants had the opportunity to rate one of 2 possible desirable and feasible social media guidelines associated with each theme using a 4-point Likert scale. The results of round 3 provided a consensus of desirable and feasible guidelines answering research question 1. Round 4, the final round, participants rated the importance of their confidence and the likelihood of actually implementing all 5 guidelines. So the final data collection yielded a consensus of desirable and feasible organizational guidelines that could be used, again, across various industries. So running through the guidelines, guideline 1, whether an employee is exempt, non-exempt, temporary, or volunteer status, social media activity should not interfere with work commitments. Non-exempt, temporary, and volunteer employees must be on the clock to represent the company. Guideline 2. Divulging confidential company information, including but not limited to business plans, strategies, financial information, and proprietary or sensitive information is strictly prohibited on social media or otherwise. Guideline 3, the posting of comments or materials such as photography, videos, audio, etc. is prohibited if such comments or materials are obscene, falsely or maliciously false, unlawfully defamatory, threatening, and or abusive to any person or entity. Finally, guideline 4, the creation of the company's social media presence is subject to the rules and policies of the organization. Only authorized employees can post on company social media platforms. If the employee is authorized to communicate about the business or business-related matters, the employee must disclose their connection with the business. Finally, guideline 5, for personal social media accounts where employee connection to the business is apparent, employees should be careful to avoid implying any endorsements of products, persons, or entities on behalf of the organization. So for each individual guideline, participants could rate individually each one the importance, which rated at 3.5 or higher, confidence at 3 or higher, and the likelihood of implementation, which was nearly at a 3.0 or higher. All batches actually derived from the current list. The research study contributes to the current literature as a model for identifying social media guidelines that can be implemented regardless of the industry. The lines between control of social media have often become blurred, which the study bridges the gap between finding success in creating guidelines that provide the company without infringing on employees' fundamental freedoms. Not only did participants rate each individual guideline as previously mentioned, but they also had the opportunity to provide a general tolerance and importance of social media, as well as an overall collective assessment of the importance, confidence, and likelihood of implementing all 5 guidelines. So the goal of the classical Delphi research study was to create paradigm shifts within an organization by identifying desirable and feasible social media guidelines that can be used across various industries. The need for a standardized set of guidelines may help organizations align themselves with employees regardless of business sector. With so much communication taking place on social media and the growing popularity of global marketplace, employees and employers are beginning to embrace social networking sites to transfer knowledge. Social media provides an open communication for users and a sense of freedom in expressing their thoughts, beliefs, feelings, and opinions. As younger generations enter the workplace, organizational leaders should be open to bridging the gap between theory and practice regarding the acceptance of social media. Future research could include a more industry diverse participation pool that includes global organizations, a larger sample size, and account for a growing trend of the remote workforce. With the number of individuals using social media to increase to around 3 billion by 2021, organizations must be able to coordinate their strategies while maintaining an employee-centric environment. Even as the debate of ownership of social media continues, organizations must maximize the benefits and minimize the risks without infringing on their employees' right to self-identify through the establishment of clear and concise social media guidelines. Thank you all for joining me today through our journey of the risks and paradigm shifts associated with an employee's right to self-identify on social media. Feel free to reach out to me at any time, as previously mentioned, if you have questions, comments, concerns, or if you'd like me to present at one of your upcoming events. We'll now open it up for questions. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Pearson. You do have some questions, so I will go ahead and ask those. This is from Dr. Peggy Sundstrom. In Guideline 5, I just moved one moment. In Guideline 5, there seems to be a lot of wiggle room around an employee being careful. What were the participants' thoughts about this issue, and what are your thoughts?
So certainly there's wiggle room in any of the guidelines specific to the organization or the business sector or anything along those lines. So all the guidelines are kind of an overarching for any business sector to kind of start the foundation in the conversation, because what we've seen throughout this research study was a lot of organizations, I believe the number, and don't quote me on this, but I believe it was around 60% of individuals don't even utilize social media, especially smaller organizations. They don't see a return on investment. So these guidelines are just to set the foundation and give people some guidance on what's appropriate and what is not. And certainly, again, it depends on the business sector and the environment you're in, but it really is kind of the baseline. And those individuals that don't use social media or just starting to, these are a great approach to utilizing that. And employees, if they're familiar with these 5 basic guidelines, and they're the same across industries, and standardized, they know kind of what the baseline is going into any employment.
Thank you. Karen Paramore she stated, this is exactly a question I have, Peggy. More concise definitions are needed for how exactly the comments are being reviewed. And Susan Burgett actually asked, what data analysis software did you use for this study?
So I utilize Zoho, Zoho Survey. So Zoho has a whole suite of business tools, and I actually use them for one of my business endeavors. So I am familiar with it. It's an easy tool to use. Participants found it very easy to use. I had no questions actually on the use, and it helps automatically analyze some of the data, especially through rounds 2 through 4.
She also had another question pertaining to the Likert scale ranges. Did you use, what were those? Was it such as never, seldom, sometimes, always? What did it look like?
So typically it was very desirable to very undesirable to very desirable for the main questions. Now in terms of the tolerance, it was a little different. So the tolerance and the importance and things like that was more of a rating system. So rounds 2 used the 5-point, and part of round 1 used a 5-point, and then 3 and 4 used a 4-point Likert type scale to really hone in, and you took out that neutral component to give some validity to the study.
She also had this question, and what's the link for Zoho software?
I think it's zoho.com, and then they have a whole list of a whole list of products they offer. Or Zoho One is their enterprise version, and that will give you a real robust feel for what they offer. So I think if you just Googled Zoho survey, it would certainly pop up.
Thank you. Dr. Margie Esteville has this question. If there are lawsuits brought by the employee against the employer for the employer's actions regarding social media privacy, for example, what scenarios or contexts seem to generate problems regarding content?
So there's still an ongoing battle of who owns the content. Really, the guidelines are to set the foundation for any disciplinary actions or things of that nature, and just to help avoid risks in general. But in terms of legal action, a lot of individuals from the research I've done and talking to other individuals was the freedom of speech aspect. But as I mentioned within the presentation, that only covers pay and working conditions type of piece. So really, there's no clear federal guidelines. It's more state by state on what is required to by an employee or employer, excuse me.
Okay. And Dr. Estville said, it makes sense on who owns the content in a private company's communication network. I have a question to close this out. How will the results that you've found in your study, how can you apply it in your own role, both not only just as a professional in the industry you're in, also as a faculty member, and what was your experience in doing research like this?
So utilizing this, so the nice thing with the study, and certainly again, they're kind of generalized, going back to Dr. Sundstrom's question at the beginning, is they are generalized enough that they can be used across various industries. And that's the nice thing about it. Again, it's just the foundation and the top 5. Usually, employee manuals and handbooks are quite lengthy. So it really sets the foundation, but it's really nice for industries, especially education industries, depending on the size of the organization, that have minimal or no social media guidance, not only for employees, but students as well. And it really puts it in perspective on, what's right and wrong. And that's what it's really getting down to at the end of the day is, what's appropriate and not appropriate, and not just kind of a free for all, right, within the workplace. So that's really, what I've found and identified throughout this study. And I've actually applied this and approached one of my employers about this. And they're looking at utilizing some of these guidelines within their own environment, because they found value in it. And that, again, is the nice thing about the research that I found, is because the biggest thing is one employer might have these policies, another employer might not have any, and some just don't even care. well, these guidelines can be used across all industries.
One other question I would have, and it would be for anyone that's watching this presentation, whether it's live or recorded, can you give your experience of doing a dissertation as a doctoral student here at Ashford and some tips for any of the students that might be watching so they can successfully navigate either their dissertation or applied doctoral project?
Sure. So it's like any project at work or any project at home or anything like that. You're going to have ups and downs. Things aren't going to go right some days, but you got to keep going. The biggest thing that I found was time management and setting an agenda that I want to accomplish, certain things this month, this week, this day. Right. And you'll hear a lot throughout the dissertation project, do something every day. And that's very true. Certainly some days you're going to have family things or holidays or whatever it is, and you're not going to have, the ability to do things every single day. But just keep going. That's the biggest thing. You've come this far and just keep going. And again, you're going to might put out some of the best work you think you've done, and it might come back redlined with comments, suggestions, ways to improve, but take that as a learning opportunity. And oftentimes throughout the dissertation project, you're going to come to a point where you're going to say, I don't understand, this doesn't make sense, this isn't how we write in the real world. But at the end of the day, what it really does is provide you that foundation for understanding how to research, how to get professional and valid research results that can be used within the industry. And during one of my residencies, one of the best things I heard is, what is this going to do to change or improve your industry? And that's the best, some of the best advice I got. And that's how I came up with my research topic and questions and things of that nature, because I always kept that in the back of my head. So the biggest thing is keep going, set a time frame, set an agenda, and just one piece at a time. And I would look at things as one chapter at a time. Okay, I'm done with chapter 1, on to chapter 2, you know what I mean? And celebrate those wins along the way, because that's very important.
Perfect. Well, thank you so very much, Dr. Pearson. We really appreciate your sharing your knowledge and understanding what you learned. Everyone, make sure that you reach out to Dr. Pearson at his information on the screen. We do appreciate it. Thanks so very much for everyone coming. We will hopefully see you in another session here today. There's one more, I believe. Thanks again so much. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.